Now, service delivery will be key factor ahead of the May elections. The recent spike of service delivery protests across South Africa have really suggested a roiling up of the numbers from pollsters who predicted an ANC victory, but not necessarily the one that they were looking for. We speak to one of those people who runs polls across the country, and these are people-to-people polls, not rather the digital polls. Marie Harris is the Director of Public Affairs at Ipsos and joins me now to discuss the forthcoming elections. Marie, when a service delivery protest sparks up, do you worry about the integrity of your data?
Not really. Because it's only one of the factors that come into this whole thing. We have said after the February study we do, it was done from the 1st of February to the 4th of March, that it is likely that service delivery protests will spike before the election. Because why would anybody let such chance go past? If you're unhappy about the service delivery in your area, and the eyes of all the politicians and the eyes of the media are on you in the 2 months before the election, obviously, that's the time to explore things like service delivery protests. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take them seriously. I'm not saying that at all.
It's just too opportune a time for those without
the right time. And if we look at that, about 40% of South Africans do say that violent protest is the only way to get service delivery. So it's 4 out of every 10. That's a serious figure. We're
going to get down to the numbers, but first I want us to, let's embrace the bigger picture and then we'll go there. Is this national election essentially being fought on local issues?
Not really.
Okay.
It is fought on issues that have been important for a very, very long time.
Okay.
In fact, since 1994 and even before 1994, issues like job creations, issues like service delivery, issues like politicians promising things and not necessarily delivering. On corruption, that's a huge issue in this election. Very many people say, well, they don't know who to vote for because which politician is not corrupt. So I'm not answering that question necessarily. That's not one for me. But if we look at why people will vote in the election and why they will not vote, they say, what does the vote count?
And that is a voter apathy, really. How much of that factors into the forthcoming election? Because, you know, I vote, but I consider it a civil duty and something that I cannot just let go of. And I believe that there's a democratic right and a democratic protest. And maybe if protesting against the elections is what you want to do, then that is your democratic right. But how much of voter apathy, how much are people out there thinking, will I really be able to influence the bigger picture, whether or not I show up?
You know what? There are about 38 million South Africans who are eligible to vote. Of them, 10 million are not going to vote, they're not registered.
And that's voter alienation.
That is a big factor of voter alienation. There's just about 26.7 million voters registered. Of those, not all of them are going to vote. There are still very big uncertainty. There are questions about what voter turnout will be on the day of the election. There are things that influence it. We can talk about those things later. But I do think of the 26.7, say another 7 or 8 million are not going to vote.
Jeez, that's a large number.
That is a lot of people who are just not going to make that grasp.
That's almost a third of the available voting electorate. Now, I hear that a lot of that is really the youth vote that most people speak about. When I hear the fact that, you know, the youth are going through voter alienation, as it were, I wonder about maybe it's norms that we in the media have allocated certain parties, but could the fact that the youth will not necessarily turn up at the polls, will that be a good or bad thing for the EFF? What's your projection?
I do think that's a bad thing for the EFF. If we look at the youth, it's all over the world. We are not unique. All over the world, young people are not the best voters that they are. They
got other things to do when election day.
They have other things to do. That's very, very true. But then if we look at EFF support, it's a very interesting dichotomy inside the party. On the one side, young people, young professionals, and on the other side, workers like mine workers, manufacturing workers and those, they are much better voters than what the youth are. So I do think that is to the detriment sometimes of the EFF, that age group is not really the best voters in the country.
All right, let's get into the heart of things, but housekeeping first. Polls and pollsters have not been covered in glory following mostly wrong predictions for the 2016 American elections, not seeing Brexit. How do I go and invest in South Africa based on your polls?
Well, we have been right, or almost right, since 1994.
Okay.
So
what's been your margin of error?
Well, 1.65.
And you've never been out of that range?
We have been out in 2009.
Okay.
What happened there? I think we were 2% out on the Democratic Party at that stage. Not on the ANC. We have never been wrong on the ANC. It is, you know what? It is truthfully easier to predict when a party gets such a huge part of the votes. So smaller parties are always more difficult, because the margin of error is simply higher when smaller parties are coming into the mix.
I was about to ask you that, Marie, that in 2014, the new kids on the block was the EFF, and you really did not have a real test of their ground support, as it were. What did you predict for them? How far away was that from what they got?
We said 5, they got 6.53.
Oh.
Or something like that.
Okay. Let's get to the big guns now. South Africa's well-clustered political system leaves us with a big three, as it were. One time it used to be the IFP, but now that part of that big three is the EFF.
That's quite good in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah? So, the home province?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the outlook for them in the rest of the country?
I think nationally they will get about between 2 and 3. The IFP.
It's not exactly far from what they got in 2014, and at least there's a growth.
No, but they did better in the 2016 local election. But then we need to look at the IFP concentrates on issues that are important to the people in KwaZulu-Natal. And therefore, they do better in local government elections than what they do in national polls. It's a logical process, I think.
Some say the ANC is trying to use that local government election results against the incumbent now in the DA, as we saw in Alex, and what the situation that is currently unfolding. But
politics.
There will be a lot of politicking going into this. But just how much do people? There's some people who've never had, work opportunity since democracy. For them, there has been very little qualitative change, if any. Are those people among the disgruntled, I'm not going to vote, the system doesn't work for me? Or are they seeking to be part of the voting bloc, as it were?
Some of them are, but not all of them are.
Okay.
I think what we also need to keep in mind is that a lot of South Africans, especially in rural areas, are very devoted ANC voters. So that they get that vote because those are the only politicians that these people ever see. What
do you do your survey? How big is the sample pool? And we are talking particularly here about your March survey.
The March survey was 3,500 people, of which that is South Africa as a whole. Okay,
and this is all the 9 provinces?
All the 9 provinces. Okay. And then we ask people whether they're registered to vote. Okay. Obviously that then takes off sizable part of the proportion, but of the people. But it's very, very important to start at a national survey. Everybody eligible to vote, to get to answers of why people are not going to vote.
Do you find the same issues persist for voters in urban and peri-urban areas?
A lot of times.
Is it?
A lot of times.
Okay. And
things get more important, like corruption is far more important this time than last time.
What is the number one, I don't know if you did such a sample, what is the number one gripe for voters out there? What are they looking for? Is it jobs?
Jobs.
All right.
So work, job creation. Rural areas and urban areas.
Okay. And then that's followed by?
That's followed by corruption these days. And then things like poverty. education, health.
Let's speak about corruption. There has been a lot of backlash from, people who vote ANC, let's call them people who traditionally voted ANC, when they saw the ANC list for national and provincial positions, if it were. Could that, the fact that that list is still as it was, it hasn't essentially changed, could that sway voters a certain way as compared to when you did the sample?
It's possible.
All right.
It is possible.
But you don't imagine that it could be bigger than 2%?
No, but for that reason, we have another poll in the field. A poll is only true for the time when it was done. So the things that we talk about now is it was true for February and the beginning of March. But obviously, that's quite a while before the May election.
Okay.
We're doing another poll and the results will be out just before the May election.
Welcome back to the intersection of money and power. I am Karabole Tata. You're watching Political Capital, and we are talking about polls in the lead up to the May 8th elections in South Africa. Just how much are money managers and investors going to put out there as they try and buy cheap South African companies and stocks, hoping that political stability and policy certainty will be part of the norm coming into the next administration, as it were. Marie Harris is still with me, who joins me more for the second part of this conversation. Marie, you predict that the ruling party, the African National Congress, will get some 61%, that the DA will get some 18% of the vote, that the EFF, which is the third largest party in the country, will get some 10% of the votes. My first question, which of the politicians agree with you about your polls?
I think in their hearts, quite a few of them agree. But I do understand that when they get up at the stage, they need to say other things. But then, what I said to you just before the break, remember, this was the results from February and beginning of March. At that stage, we were looking for the first time, this time, at different scenarios when it comes to looking at the votes. Remember, we talked about it earlier, not everybody is going to vote. We can have different turnout scenarios. The lower the voter turnout, the more it benefits a big party like the ANC.
Okay.
The higher the voter turnout, the more diversity we get in the vote. So if we look at a medium voter turnout, the results are, for the March survey, are like that you just discussed, 61% for the ANC. The DA was getting a little bit more than what we measured it last year. They are still 4 percentage points off the 22 that they got in 2014.
The DA is saying that it's doing its own internal polling, they're fighting your polling. They see themselves in the mid-20s. I don't exactly know where the growth spurt comes from myself, but what do you say to that, contestation?
There are two very important questions you always have to ask when you look at politics. Is it possible? And is it probable? Now, it is possible that they will get in the mid-20s. Is it probable? I don't think so.
Why do you say that?
And I say that because of the bad press and the bad circumstances the DA had last year. With all the infighting, with all the whole issue of Patricia de Lille,
the back and forth court appearances, and not winning those court cases actually hurt Brand DA.
It hurt the DA really, really badly. And at a stage when the ruling party was not doing well either. And at the same stage when the EFF wasn't doing greatly. So there was no opposition party that really benefited from the uncertainty in the ANC last year, because they couldn't. They were caught in their own little fights. And those own little fights are the things that hurt political parties really, really very badly. We can talk about COPE. What happened to COPE? They did very well when the first time they participated. I think they got something like 8% or whatever. Then they started with the infighting, and they went nowhere.
And you expect that to cost the DA as well?
I think it will cost the DA, but what I am saying also is that they're doing better now than what we measured them last year. So we measured them at 18, now the last one. It is possible that it can go up a little bit. I don't think it will get to the 27, 28.
Okay. Marie, I've learned to, maybe as a consequence of following politics, that the national picture is one thing, but it's really a collection, if you will, of the provincial play, as it were, the battleground province, that will be another area for contestation. We saw, as a result of the 2016 municipal elections, that the ANC is fallible to actually losing vote. And I believe that they're coming into this election with a little bit of respect for the South African voting electorate, as it were.
Which
by no means am I saying that it's enough, but a little bit. But when I look at that, I think we focus so much on Gauteng province because of the DA, EFF, ANC politics that we forgot that other provinces are still battleground states. And I'm particularly looking at Limpopo, where the president is today, and Seshego it's actually the home of the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema. You find Julius today, he's campaigning, and the EFF are campaigning in KZN, which is a traditional ANC stronghold. And you find people trying to break the mold, as it were. But there are battleground states within provinces. Do you see major swings anywhere? I mean, has anything changed essentially in the Western Cape? Do you believe the DA is still in prime position there?
I am, at this stage, not putting my head on a block about the Western Cape.
Why?
Because the ANC is doing really well in the Western Cape.
Okay.
And
who's doing well, Brand ANC or Brand Cyril Ramaphosa?
Brand.
Is there a difference?
I think there's a difference. Brand Cyril Ramaphosa is far more popular than Brand ANC.
This is so weird because some people still say that they can't consolidate the president, Cyril Ramaphosa's message of renewal and cleaning up with that list. And I expect that list to also have
that
impact
list
on...
will have an influence. That list will have an influence. But then also, another interesting thing about the ANC and about Brand Cyril Ramaphosa is that in previous elections, the ANC vote was more or less split half and half male-female. This time, 55% of ANC vote comes from females and 45% comes from males. Brand Cyril Ramaphosa is doing a lot better amongst females than amongst males. No, but for serious reasons as well.
Why?
Because he talks family, he talks the future of children, and those things that matter a lot to women.
But the EFF is speaking about the same thing. I was at the election manifesto. They were all about early childhood development.
All right, but if we look at the EFF, 2/3 of EFF support is male. Females are not really that enthusiastic, perhaps is the right word, of voting for a radical party.
Yeah.
And we
so
see
more
that.
of the same, more of the same.
They look at the EFF, they say, first of all, the EFF is too radical for them. They don't like the fact that they disrupt Parliament. And honestly, 2/3 of their support comes from males, young males, and the other third from females. So there are females that find something to speak to them in that message, but they do not have general appeal amongst women.
We saw the results from the municipal elections, particularly in the Northwest. I come from the Northwest, so I pay special attention to it. We saw the ANC drop a large majority. We saw the DA pick up some 4% versus the last municipal elections. And we saw the EFF, if you will, with an entry of some 13%. Is the ruling party's shenanigans in the Northwest creating an even bigger vacuum? Because right now, they have not necessarily resolved, the ANC that is, they haven't necessarily resolved all of the challenges and leadership that they face in the Northwest alone. Are they primed for the picking there?
I think the ANC will win the Northwest, but not with the same margin as the last time. I do think the opposition in the Northwest is going to be the EFF. The same way, I also think the EFF is going to be the opposition in both Limpopo and Mpumalanga.
Who do you see eating the lunch of the Democratic Alliance? Is it the Freedom Front Plus? I mean, there's been all kinds of things said about the negative campaigning from the DA about the Freedom Front Plus and some of the the texts that they've been sending to the electorates out there about not voting for smaller parties and sticking with the DA and such things. So the negative campaigning, who's eating their lunch really?
I do think if we look at smaller parties, there are two bundles of smaller parties, small ones and really small ones. And the small ones, I would include the IFP that we spoke about already.
Shame.
I would also include the Freedom Front Plus, because we are currently measuring them at about 2.5%, which is better than what they did before. And yes, they are eating some of the DA lunch in places like Gauteng and in the Free State.
A parting question. We've seen a rise, if you will, of church or religious orientated political parties, well, at least that as their root cause. I mean, for instance, one of the new entrants, the African Transformation Movement, has already done well in a by-election in the Eastern Cape, coming just behind the ANC and in front of the DA and the EFF, so that's a bit impressive. But I'm interested to learn what the emergence of these new religious political parties do for the old. And particularly here, I'm looking at a party like the ACDP.
I do think that if we speak about those parties, many of them have one single issue that they campaign on. And then it is really difficult to get voters from across the board. And something that's very dangerous is to look at by-election results and think that's the pattern in the whole country. Because you need to remember, by-elections are always about local issues. It's very possible that the ATM did very well in that specific constituency. They could have targeted that constituency and put all their big guns in there. It is not possible to put that same effort into a national election, where now naturally you have to appeal to 26.7 million voters. Small parties just don't have the capacity to do that.
That's Marie Harris, Director of Public Affairs at Ipsos. Lots of money managers and investors have heeded her advice and invested due to it. I would urge you to use a little bit of salt, but the decision ultimately is still yours. Thank you very much for joining us here on Political Capital. We'll be back on your screen this Thursday at 6:30. Until then, take care.